What is Agile and why and how should you use it? Special guest Jared Wilcurt is going to go into all of those questions and more in this deep dive video into the Agile development process. Jared Wilcurt is a senior software engineer and prolific part of the JavaScript open source community. If you want to find out more information about Jared, all of the links are in the description below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Enjoy the video.
Here's the plan tonight. We're going to go over Agile, where it came from, the 12 principles of Agile, which we'll go over pretty quickly, a few different implementations and approaches of how to actually apply these ideas, the principles. We'll talk a lot about terminology, so you guys won't be blindsided by anything like that. The different roles in groups and organizations, story life cycles, and go over an example of what that looks like from one approach, and then talk about the different ceremonies in Agile, and then some resources. So let's get started. Where did this thing come from? So there is a website, the agilemanifesto.org, which kind of goes over the history of the project and where it started. It has this background image that we can see here on the side. And that is actually a photo of some of the people that were in attendance when Agile was first invented. So what they did was they got some of the top software developers in the world who were thought leaders on different topics, some of which had already invented their own processes and documented and even wrote books about ways to organize and to manage software projects. And so a lot of these people with lots of experience building software who came together, some of them with experience on planning out how to manage that process, came together and discussed for a couple of days. They actually met up at a ski lodge, and they went into a big log cabin, and they just hunkered down for a few days and talked about all of these ideas. And they had a whiteboard, and they drew a bunch of stuff up, and they discussed a lot of things. And then at the end of it, they came up with a few things that they could all agree on. On that website, you'll actually see this is the front page of it will have this text. We are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. That is, while there is value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. So this is the part that most people are familiar with when they see Agile. It's this concept of individuals' interactions are more important than the process and tools. Working software is more important. Customer collaboration is where our focus should be at. And being able to respond to change is more important than following a plan. So this is the kind of core ideas that they've laid out. They also have a bunch of principles that go along with it. So there's 12 slides here. I'm not going to go in depth on all of these. We're going to kind of spend a little bit more time on some than the others, but let's go through all of them. Our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. This comes from, for a long time, you would see people delivering software and they would do a new release every year or two. And they found that if you did smaller, more often releases, then you would get better feedback and have better direction and be able to solve problems better, know about things in advance before you go too far down one path. So that's kind of the idea behind this thing, where the highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. Welcome changing requirements. Even late in development, Agile process harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. Yeah, I think that's pretty self-explanatory there. Be able to change at any moment depending on new information that comes in. Deliver working software frequently from a couple of weeks to a couple of months with a preference for the shorter timescale. So this was optimistic back in 2001 when they wrote this, and now this is actually uh, kind of slow in comparison to what we do today, where some companies actually release software multiple times a day. Where I work, we do it about 2 or 3 times a week. So here, where it says from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, prefer to do it on a shorter time scale. Deliver the software frequently, and that goes back to that being able to give them value on short iterations of releases of small new features to the software. Business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. This is something that avoids a lot of problems through communication, where if these two people with differing understandings of the project are not communicating, then they may be misunderstanding each other. And the more interactions they have together, the more likely they are to really understand each other better. Build projects around motivated individuals. Give them the environment and support they need, and trust them to get the job done. The most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. Yes, that's always the best. There's so many little micro expressions and hand gestures that go into face-to-face communication, and the closer you can get to that, the better. Face-to-face is best, followed by video conference, followed by phone call, followed by text messaging or instant messaging, followed by email is like the last option. So always do face-to-face communication if that is an option over like sending an email. Working software is the primary measure of progress. There's so many ways you can measure your progress on a project. There's so many ways so many different metrics you can use, but ultimately the only thing that really matters is, does the software work and can people actually use it? Agile processes promote sustainable development. The sponsors, developers, and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. This kind of harkens to an idea where you could do a game jam or a hackathon, and you could kick something out pretty fast. You could get something up and working, a prototype, really fast over the course of a weekend, but that pace is not sustainable, because to be able to do that, you have to throw a lot of stuff and cut at the wall, and you have to cut a lot of corners and work pretty messily, fast and messy. And from that, you can make some cool stuff in a short amount of time. But that's usually not a sustainable pace, because a messy code base becomes really unwieldy and harder to update and maintain over time. Where, if there's a blank canvas, you say, hey, can you add this feature? I say, yeah, no problem. I'll be done with that in 2 hours. But then 2 years into the project, someone were to ask you, can you add that same feature if it was never added to begin with? You would say, oh, that's going to take like a month to do, because that's in a dangerous part of the code base where stuff breaks really easily. And, once I start adding that in, I'm going to have to change a lot of other stuff. And then I don't know when I change the other thing if that's going to break some other stuff that's unrelated to it or not. And yeah, that's going to take a while to make sure that's actually implemented properly and doesn't break anything. However, if you had built everything at a consistent pace and take your time to ensure quality throughout that whole process, then it won't take you 2 hours to build it. It may take you a day or two. But then 2 years later, had they asked you, it should still take you about a day or two to do that same thing. It shouldn't be a very difficult process to do the same thing if you do it the right way. Continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. So that's going back to what I was just talking about of, if you pay attention to the quality of your work and how you're building things out, then that will actually enhance your agility, because you'll be able to make changes more quickly because things will be more reliable and stable. Simplicity the art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential. That is not a good definition of the word simplicity, um, but I disagree with that. But the point that they're trying to make is, I think minimalism is a better word for this. Minimalism, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. But I think that just is meant to convey the idea that you should be planning this stuff out so that you don't need to redo the same thing, or you build it the wrong way and have to go back and change it. Or if you spend some time thinking through it in advance, it could save you lots and lots of time on building the workout. So um, the best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. At regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. We'll talk more about that later. Okay, so those are the 12 principles. I think you guys have a rough idea now as to that's what Agile is. Whenever someone says Agile, that's what Agile is. It's those principles. That's all it is. And that's lowercase a. When you talk about Agile, we refer to lowercase a Agile. And then we have capital A Agile, and those are people who have certifications in Agile, and people who have job titles in Agile, and people who give conferences on their Agile conferences, and there are workshops, and there are software for Agile. Again, Agile is a philosophy. It's a established set of values that you go to see, are you doing things the right way? Does this match up with this? And if not, why? You know, is there true value in deviating from that? So we're going to talk about the capital A Agile for the rest of this, which is going to be the implementations and approaches. So let's look at some of these. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can take those ideas, the philosophy, those values, and then apply that to an actual workflow and process. And here's a few of them that are listed. There is Scrum, which is by far the most popular. If you are applying for a job, or you see somebody post a job posting, or you talk to them, hey, do you guys use Agile there? It says that. They probably mean Scrum or some variation on that. After that, there's Kanban, and we'll show an example of Scrum and Kanban later. Kanban is probably the next most common, and a lot of people do like slight combinations of those two things. Kanban is, if you've ever seen pictures or a video of somebody in an office and they've got a bunch of Post-it notes on a wall, and they're moving one from one area to another to show the progress of it. Or if you've ever used software like Trello, that's a Kanban board, and that's part of that Kanban approach. Lean is another one that's more around the idea of what is the absolute minimal amount of work that we can do to technically achieve something. So every single step of the way is assuming that you may need to completely change your direction in 5 minutes. So that's what lean is. It's really tight, and every single step of work you do is really, really small, and it gets the smallest amount of work out the door, and you just keep building on stuff, and it lets you change really quickly. And then there's a bunch of these other ones. I'm not going to explain every one of these things, but depending on the industry you work in and the programming languages that you're using, like for example, if you are writing software for the aviation software, or writing software for the military, or for the computers that are inside of cars that make all those judgments around when you press the brake pedal, it actually sends a signal to a piece of software that runs. Lines of code are executed when you press the brakes on modern cars. So in those different industries, they may have slightly different approaches that are specific to that industry. They may use something different. like the dynamic system development method or rational unified process or whatever. Um, but they're all going to be roughly these same ideas. That's just how do we organize the work that we do and um, plan out how we achieve things and actually get the software to completion. My favorite one on this list was one created in the 90s, and it's called Extreme Programming. I don't know anything about it. I just think the name is hilarious. Okay, terminology. I'm gonna dump a truckload of terminology on you guys. So here is the most common stuff you will hear in the world of Agile. Sprints, cadence, or iteration. That is, there is a period of time in which you will be doing work and you will say, I'm going to get this much work done for the next week or the next 2 weeks or the next 3 weeks or the next 6 weeks or whatever that period of time is. And then the most common of that would be a 2 week sprint. So every 2 weeks, you have a new iteration, a new cycle. That's your cadence. It's every 2 weeks. Uh, you take on new work and you try to get all that work done in that 2 weeks. Any work that you don't get done goes into the next sprint, and that is called carryover. You're carrying work over from the previous sprint. If you get stuff done early, then you could grab some stuff off of the backlog. The backlog is a list of all of the possible work that can ever be done on this project. So anytime you have an idea for something that can be done, or a bug that needs fixed or something, you create a ticket or an issue or a story, and that is then stored on the backlog. Um, and occasionally you'll go through and organize the backlog a little bit to prioritize stuff so that the stuff at the top is what gets taken off next, and that's what gets worked on. Um, you have stories. Specifically, you may hear them called user stories. In the IT world, these were often called tickets or just GitHub issues. You'll hear them called issues or tickets often too. But stories, or specifically user stories, has a specific agile term. And an actual user story has a specific uh, format for how you would write it. You would start off by writing the ticket as saying, as a user, I need blank because blank. And instead of user, sometimes you may talk about a specific user or a group of users. So you can say, um, as a seller on eBay, I need to see a dashboard of all previous sales so that I know what I should sell more of or whatever, right? That's the format. Um, or some companies will have personas of a fictional character that represents a group, which is designed to make it feel like you're designing for an actual person and to care about that person. And so they say, as Maria, I need X so that I can Y. Um, so that's the idea there. Some people really like this. They like that it's a constant reminder that there are real people who are using this, and you need to be empathetic and to care about the work that you do, because someone else, this may be their job to use your software all day long, and you may be making their life miserable by giving them bad software. So it's meant to make sure that you care about the work that you do and that you want to make something that people actually like to use and not feel painful to use it. So some people really like that approach. Other people find it kind of hokey to write that out each time. So uh, uh, some companies will just be a much more pragmatic and straight approach of, um, here's the problem, here's the solution, here's what needs to be implemented, here's how we test it to verify that it was solved correctly, and just very straightforward different sections of, here's a bug, here's what I expected to happen, here's what actually happens, and then to test this, go through the steps to reproduce and make sure that the expected outcome occurs. Yeah. Other things that you may find in a user story or in your tickets are acceptance criteria. Sometimes this is written out by a product owner or a project manager, and they will write out and say, here is the new feature, and here is the stuff that needs to actually be finished for this. You need to make sure all of these things occur, otherwise the work isn't done yet. And so, that's a good way to say, okay, if I can check all these boxes, then I know this work is done, and other people can verify that work was completed. They can go and check to see that all of those things actually happened. So sometimes you'll see acceptance criteria. There's a concept of definition of ready or definition of done, and that is on a ticket, you may have a definition of ready, which means um, this is to solve a problem. The idea of definition of ready exists to solve a problem. And that problem is I took on a ticket, I pulled this ticket into the sprint to work on it for these 2 weeks. And because it was missing some information, or this ticket just couldn't be worked on yet because it was waiting on some other ticket to be finished first, um, I wasn't able to get to this until the last day of the sprint, or I couldn't start on this at all. It should never have been brought in. And so that's the idea of definition of ready. Things that may go in there may be design mockups. You may have a designer or a UX person who draws up an actual low fidelity mockup of a wireframe, or even a high fidelity mockup that has all of the colors and borders and gradients and padding is all pixel accurate. Um, so in some cases, if you're doing a UI ticket, you may have that the design needs to be finalized before it can start. Or if you're doing a UI ticket and you are making a network request to set up the plumbing of the front end so that it can get data and display that on the page, or when the user clicks save, it submits a post request to the backend to store that data on the backend. In those cases, then the routes that you need to hit need to be finished, and they should be documented so that the front end person knows what actual API commands they need to send to the back end for that to work properly. So those are things that you may see for definition of ready. Are there any other tickets blocking it? Are there other people working in a similar part of the code base at the same time, which is a common thing to try to avoid so you don't end up with merge conflicts? Are the designs finished? Is the API finished? Those are all things where if it doesn't meet whatever your team's definition of ready is, then it shouldn't be brought in, and a different ticket should be brought in instead. And then you may have a definition of done, which is to say a ticket cannot be marked as done unless it meets all of this criteria. Um, it must pass all of the linting. It must have unit tests written for it, or end-to-end testing written for it. It must have instructions for the QA notes. You must update the permissions for the users if there are new permissions being added in. So those are all ideas around a checklist of definition of done, and every ticket should meet that criteria before it's finished, before it's considered finished. And that's a way of ensuring quality and that you're not going to accidentally push something to production that could potentially break something. Yeah, or bring down all of prod. Tasks. This is another thing you may see in stories. There may be a story that's about, here's a feature, and then you could break it down into smaller tasks that you could work on that need to be done. It's just a way of keeping track of the work that you're working on that project, so you can show that you're progressing on it, and and that process of writing out the tasks may be a good way of thinking through it to make sure that there's not anything you're missing that you may run into, so you can discuss that as a team and say, oh, what should I do for this edge case? What should I do for that? Yeah, story points and estimation. So a story point is a way of estimating the complexity of a story or of a ticket. And most people want to try to map this to time, And that's something that everyone in the agile world will tell you: do not do that. That's not good. Um, the idea here is, if you say, I will point this at 1 hour of work or 2 hours of work or 6 hours of work, um, that's not a really reliable way of working on it. A better way to think about it is um, that the larger this ticket is, the more variability there will be on how difficult it is. If it's a lot of work, then there's a greater chance that that work could be easy and maybe only take you 2 days, or it could be hard and it could take you maybe 5 days, right? Or it's a small amount of work and that could take you 5 minutes or maybe 20 or 30 minutes, right? But there's like that window of time, and the bigger the ticket gets, the bigger that range becomes of how long it would take to work on it. So it's kind of meant to represent that idea of, this is a hard number that represents an abstract concept of how difficult something is or how complex it is. Um, you'll hear a lot of people use analogies for this to talk about, a one pointer is a strawberry, a two pointer is an apple, a 3 pointer is a watermelon, and a 5 pointer is this or whatever. Like they'll just list off stuff. Or, a one pointer is a mouse, and a 2 pointer is a cat, and a 3 pointer is a dog, and a 5 pointer is a horse, and an 8 pointer is an elephant. Um, right. So, and then a 13 is a whale. And you'll hear those specific numbers: 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 20, or sometimes 21. And those are the numbers that are used for story pointing in most cases. I don't know why. It's part of the Fibonacci sequence, except that the 20 and the 21 are sometimes not in it. I don't know. But it's meant to kind of force you to decide, like, hey, is this a 3 pointer or is this a 5 pointer? And sometimes stuff just feels like a 4. And that forces you to, like, say, okay, is this actually a 5, or this is just like a big 3? Or no, I feel like this is probably going to be a 5 because of the testing that will be involved, or because of this or that. So that's kind of the idea as to why those numbers get further and further apart as you go also, to make you really think through, like, is it more of this one or that one? And that process of thinking through that is called estimation. And so as a team, your team will sit down, you will discuss a specific story, a specific ticket, and you'll say, here's the work that needs to get done. This is everything we need to know. Is there anything that we need to add into this ticket? Anything that's missing? Does anyone have questions? Does everyone understand it? And then as a team, once everyone understands it and the ticket's good, then you'd say, okay, how big is this? And everyone would estimate. And a lot of teams will do a blind estimation, where people will literally hold up a playing card, like an actual deck of cards number, or they'll have poker cards, is what they call them. Or more commonly, people download an app, and they pick the number on the app and they hold that up. And there's literally agile poker card apps for your phones. And so you'd pick the number and then you say, okay, everyone ready? 3, 2, 1, and you show your phone, and everybody looks around. And that idea is to then let people choose what they think is right without having the influence of other people. Because it's really easy for someone to just not be paying attention and then look around and be like, yeah, what everyone else said. Um, so with that, if everyone holds up a 3 and you hold up a 5, then that person, the person running that meeting would say, okay, everyone said 3. Why did you say a 5? Is it actually a 5? Is there something that you know about this part of the code base that other people don't know about? Have you worked in this area and they haven't, and it's going to be harder than they expect? Or did you just overestimate and you're willing to be talked down to a 3, right? Or everyone else said 5, you said a 3. Can you convince everyone else to go down to a 3, or can you be talked up to a 5? That's the idea, is to have the discussion. it's not really about the number that you end up on, it's about the discussion and making sure everyone understands. Because what'll often happen, and this is where the estimation really shines, is here's the work, blah, 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 3, 2, 1. You said a 2, you said an 8. You know, a 2 is something you can get done in a day or half a day. An 8 is something that's going to take, probably most of the week, maybe spill into next week, maybe a week and a half even. So, like, what's that like? Why did you think this is only a 2? Why did you think this was an 8? Um, and it may be just there's clearly someone misunderstood what this ticket was about. So then they say, "Oh, I thought this was actually to do the whole thing. I didn't realize it was just to do that one part." Yeah, no, that makes sense. That is a 2. Or, "Oh, I thought we were just doing this one part. I didn't realize we were doing the whole thing." Yeah, no, that is an 8. So that's where that discussion comes in, and that's where this stuff is. You'll also hear calibration around that as well. You hear the word calibration, and that is um, where the team as a whole calibrates and discusses how they interpret different agile points, the story points, how they interpret those story points, how big they think each one is, and recalibrate as a team and decide where things should go. Okay, epics. Epics is just a way to group similar stories. So you may have at work, I have a big feature that's coming up soon where we have an app that hooks up to a different system and we display data from that other system in ours. And pretty soon we're going to be getting out of that other system, which means we need to port all of its data into our system, and we need to make a bunch of pages to let users see that data in our app and edit that data in our app. And so that's going to be a lot of pages created, a lot of new backend routes created. So it's going to be a lot of work. And so we're going to make a lot of tickets around that. And all of those tickets are going to be related to solving the same problem, that same big problem. And so they'd all be listed under the same epic. Technical debt. So this is something often referred to as tech debt. And this is the same idea as financial debt, where I want to buy a $500,000 house, and that will take me, I can save up that money on my own, and that may take me many decades to save up that money so then I can buy that house. But I don't want to wait many decades. I want to buy it now. So I go into financial debt and I take a loan out or a mortgage, and I take a loan from the bank, and now I'm in debt to that bank. And just like with financial debt, the longer I wait to pay it off, the more money I need to pay. There is interest on that loan, and the interest keeps growing over time. So the longer it takes me to pay off that loan, to pay off that debt, the more I have to spend on it. And that's the same idea around technical debt. And there's 2 types of technical debt. You have intentional technical debt, which is where you would say, there is a problem, it needs to be solved immediately. Production is down. This is a problem where this is broken. We need to fix this right now, this second, and get this out the door. And in that moment, the code you are going to write is not the code you would normally write. You are intentionally writing a lower quality of code to meet a deadline. And sometimes that deadline is really important and really soon. Sometimes it's really important and you have a week to get it done, whereas you spent 2 weeks on it or a month on it. And it lets you get something out the door sooner in exchange for lower quality code. And so you need at some point to go back and pay off that debt and to refactor that code and do it the right way. And because you already implemented it once, now you need to go back and remove that old code and add in new code to replace it. So you have additional work you need to do. So you are already agreeing to a base amount of additional work when you intentionally add tech debt. You're doing the work once, and then you need to redo that work and undo the old work and add in new. So you're doing a lot more work than had you just done it the right way. Because either way, you need to spend the 2 weeks doing it the right way. but you need to spend that 2 weeks plus the additional time of doing it the wrong way and the additional time of removing the code of doing it the wrong way. And the longer you wait, the more code gets added to the code base that makes it more difficult to go back and refactor that code. It makes it more difficult to change it because now there's more things that are interacting with that. It's gotten more complex than it was originally, and it takes more and more time to go back and clean up that tech debt. And eventually, if you don't ever clean up your tech debt, you can go bankrupt and you just need to start over on a brand new project, burn it to the ground, start over, and rebuild the entire project from scratch. Because the old code base was too unwieldy and too hard to update things in. And it may be the correct decision, right? It may the cost of rebuilding it from scratch may actually take less time than how long it would take to go through and clean up all of the problems. So there comes a point where that is financially the correct thing to do from a time perspective, the amount of time of engineering it will take. But ideally, you never get to that point. Ideally, you're paying off your debts consistently so that you never get to that point where it's that bad and that you can actually, and hopefully you're not intentionally taking on tech debt very often. So as I mentioned, there's two types of tech debt. You have the intentional type, and then you have the unavoidable type. And it just turns out that in the process of writing code, entropy will occur and your code base will naturally get worse over time. It just happens. Rust builds up. And so you do need to spend time doing tech debt to clean up and refactor things. The most common way of this happening is you are working on a project, you know the general idea of the project when you start, and you know what direction you're heading in, and you know that there's some possibilities that may change, but you know the most likely path that you'll end up on as to what features will be added in the future and how you will need to build out the application to support those features in the future. So you will make decisions around that, and you will develop patterns and architect an application with those future possibilities in mind. And inevitably, sometimes those predictions will not be correct. And what the application actually ends up becoming is different than what you had originally envisioned. And so now you have an application that was designed to do one thing, but is now doing a different thing. And so you need to go through the code and change the way that code is written so that it would be written in the way that had you known this was the path you would have ended up at, you would have written it that way to begin with. So that's another type of tech debt. That's the unavoidable kind where you need to make a decision at some point, and you may make the wrong decision, and that means you need to go back and change stuff. And how wrong you are will affect how much effort goes into that refactoring. And that's unavoidable, and you eventually will make a really wrong decision, and then 6 months later you're going to be doing a lot of refactoring. It's unavoidable, and hopefully you work at a place where they are understanding of that this is a part of the process of building software, and that you need to go through and do those major refactors sometimes to get the application back on track to be architected and designed in a way that matches what it's actually doing. All right, so that's tech debt. Continuous integration. So we talked about this a little bit before. This is an idea of automating as much of the definition of done as possible. So I mentioned earlier that linting, which I don't think we've even talked much about with you guys. Linting is the idea that you can have a program lint your code, and it will tell you, hey, this line should have a semicolon at the end of it, or this line shouldn't, or you left a space out in here. You should, put a space after the if keyword, if space parentheses, that kind of stuff. Sometimes it's stylistic like that. Sometimes it's error prevention, where if you didn't have the semicolon, it doesn't matter. But in some cases, if you don't have the semicolon, it actually does matter, and it may have a subtle bug that you wouldn't have otherwise realized. So that's what linting is. It just goes through and makes sure that your code doesn't have any common basic errors. And it also makes sure that it's stylistically consistent, that every line looks like it's written by the same people, and it's easier to read. That's the idea of linting. And then there's tests. So you write a test that runs your function and passes in stuff and verifies the stuff it gets back is what you actually expect it to return. And that if that ever changes, then either you changed that function and that was intentional and you need to update your test, or you changed something else and you unintentionally broke this other function and now it's outputting bad stuff. And that's the test is there to let you know, hey, this is failing now. Should it be? And if it is, if it should be returning this new thing, then fix it. Otherwise, you need to go back to your code and make sure that you fix your bugs so that all your tests pass. That's the idea of testing. So continuous integration, if you test most of your application, or if you're crazy, all of it, you have full test coverage, and you have really strong linting in place, those are things that can be automated. So you can have a tool like GitHub Actions or Jenkins or Travis CI or Circle CI. You'll notice those last two have CI in the name. That actually stands for continuous integration, Travis CI and Circle CI. GitHub Actions, Jenkins, those are really popular ones. If you're using a tool like that, you can have it so every time you create a pull request against your code base, that commit that you want to be merged into master can be ran by one of these automated systems like Travis CI or Jenkins or GitHub Actions. And then it can tell you if it passed the linting, if it passed the test, etc. It can even do a build and verify that the build was successful and the build didn't fail. So all of that stuff can be automated. And if that stuff fails, you don't get to merge your code in. So if all of that stuff passes, and the code is working and you do merge your code in some places they have enough confidence in their automated system that when you merge it, it automatically goes directly to production. And nobody needs to manually check it. All the manual checks would have already been done before you agreed to merge it in. And so that's what continuous integration ideally is. But the closer you can get to that, the better. And that's how at work we do this twice a week, where we get stuff merged into our dev environment multiple times a day. And then 2 or 3 times a week, we'll test things out manually in dev and try to break them. And then if they don't break, then we merge it directly to prod. So that's the idea of continuous integration. A spike. A spike is where rather than saying this is work that we know needs to be done and it needs to be done this way, if instead you're like, this is something that might be good, but we don't know, or there might be multiple choices that we should explore and evaluate. We want to pull in form validation into our app, and there are multiple libraries that we could pull in to do form validation. And we don't know which one will be the easiest to use or the best option or has the most features, which one's being updated the most often or is being maintained well. Or we don't know if we'll try these out and maybe we don't like any of these and we just roll our own and we write our own form validation for our application. So that would be a time where you would do a spike. And a spike is, I'm just going to try this thing out and see what it is. And then maybe I'll put up a PR with my findings at the end. Or maybe I'll have multiple PRs of each different approach. And then as a team, we can come together and discuss the findings of this research. So it's kind of just like a research task that may involve some code or may not. And that's usually what a spike is. And usually a spike is time boxed. So a time box is where you say, I don't know how long this is going to take to work, but if it takes how long it's going to take to get this thing to work, but if it takes longer than this amount of time, it's probably not worth doing anyways. So I'm going to time box this to 4 hours or 5 days or whatever, or a sprint or 2 sprints or whatever, and say that's my time box. And I'm going to try, if I realize like I'm going down too many rabbit holes and I only have an hour left to kind of figure stuff out, that helps me to say, okay, I'm researching a thing, but I'm going down a lot of rabbit holes. Let me just get back to getting a basic proof of concept, trying to get that to work, so I can like just give them something, an idea, and just include that I went down the rabbit holes as part of my report to like explain to everybody else when I'm discussing it with them, of like, and then I went down this and I tried this and I tried this and realized I was going way too far, so I backed out. So I don't actually know where the end of that rabbit hole leads, but that's the thing I started looking into. Um, and then as a team we can discuss, and maybe as a team we say this is worth the time to continue pursuing and to like figure out the rest of those rabbit holes and like dive deeper into that and find out what the correct answer is for this. Or we can say, okay, well, that was cool. We understand what that does now, and we've learned from this as a team, but we're not going to go that route, so we can just kind of dump that work. So that's the idea of a time box, is to make sure that you don't spend a lot of time on something that you're just going to end up dumping anyways. Um, cool. Swarming and war room. So there's if you are working on something and you are struggling with it and you're having trouble, then a swarm is when other people who have your same job title or role will all swarm around you. So if you're doing back end work and you are stuck on something or you're struggling, you can't figure it out, then you may have one or two or three back end people come over and take a look at your problem and either sit next to you as you work through it and kind of talk through things and ideas, or they may just tell you, push up your code wherever you're at, and I'll pull it down and I'll look at it on my computer and use my own dev tools and see if I can figure it out. And if I can, I'll either send you a link to the solution, or I'll IM you a code snippet, or I'll just do the commit and push it back up to your branch so you can see how I fixed it. So that's the idea of swarming. A war room is there is a major problem, and everyone on the team needs to go into a room and sit down and work on this problem, and don't work whatever you're doing, drop everything you're doing. This is the only thing you're working on until it's fixed. And everyone on the team goes and they sit in the war room and they work on that problem until it's resolved. And that may be, hey, production is down, or that may be, hey, this customer that is paying us more money than any of our other customers just screwed up their data. They deleted half of their data, and we need to go and recover that data in our systems and get that back up online for them. Something like that. That may be like a big, high importance priority issue where everyone drops what they're doing, they all hop on this one problem and just dogpile it and get it finished. And that's what a war room means. You're literally all sitting in the same conference room working on a thing. WIP Limit stands for work in progress. And we'll look at a visual example of this later, but the idea is we have stories and there are story points associated to those, and we have a team of people, and those people can pull in different stories and be working on them, and they may get to a point where they're done with this and they're waiting on a review, or they got stuck on this and they're waiting on someone to help, and so they go and pull in a different ticket to work on that. And the WIP limit is the number of story points that can be in play at the same time, where they're all being worked on simultaneously. And you can set a WIP limit and say, we probably shouldn't be exceeding 40 story points for the team, because if we are, then that's a problem. So that can be your WIP limit for a sprint, where you say, on average we complete about 40 story points in a 2-week period as a team. So when we're planning out this upcoming sprint, we'll bring in about 40 story points worth of tickets. Or it could be, we don't plan for a 2-week period. Instead, everyone is just pulling in work when they're done with their previous work, and we should have maybe 10 story points on average for our WIP limit for how often. And that's a way for a product manager or a project manager to look and be able to estimate how long it will take to get something done. They can look at an epic and say, this epic has all of these stories in it, and we pointed all of those stories, and that is going to take 120 points. And we usually get through about 40 points per sprint. but we won't be working solely on the epic. We'll also be working on tech debt and bug fixes and other emergency things that may pop up or user requests that may pop up. And so we'll probably get about half of those done. So if we get 40 story points and about half of that is going to be on this feature, that's 20. And we have 120 story points to get through. So that will be 6 sprints. Each sprint is 2 weeks. So that's 12 weeks. There's about 4 weeks in a month. So it's about 3 months. So I can now roughly eyeball it and tell our users that, hey, we're going to be working on that. You'll be drip fed some of the features as they're ready, but the whole thing will probably not be done for maybe 3 or 4 months, depending on if anything else comes up or if there's additional work that we didn't account for when we were planning. But expect it to be the earliest possible will be 3 months, but more likely it'll take a little bit longer than that. Um, Worst case scenario, 6 months, right? That's a way for a project manager to say, this is something realistic as to the timeline. So as a developer, I don't care about the story points. I don't care about the WIP limit. But as a project manager who needs to talk to the users and the stakeholders and tell them this is what you can expect and when you can expect it, it's very useful to know the story points roughly and the WIP limit roughly. A release is whenever you have your application, your software that you're working on, the project, whenever that project is in a state that is polished enough that you don't know of any bugs, it has some new features added in that you think are working properly, and there's nothing that's broken, then you would do a release of the software. Some places do release multiple releases a day. The place I work at does a release 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes once a week, just depending on if people have days off and stuff. Some places, when I worked at Salesforce, the Salesforce Marketing Cloud, where I worked, did 6 releases a year. And so every month and a half was this huge process to get a release out, and it would take weeks. Salesforce in San Francisco, they would do 4 releases a year, 1 a quarter. And so the Marketing Cloud took theirs from 6 down to 5, and Salesforce Core back in San Francisco went from 4 to 5 a year. So they kind of met each other in the middle there. And so it's different for different types of software and different tech stacks as to what is realistically achievable for when a release can come out. For a long time, Adobe would do a Photoshop release every 2 years. And then they got it down to once a year. And now they do it 4 or 5 times a year. Yeah, and then scope creep. Scope creep is when I am working on a ticket and my ticket is to do one thing, and there is something else small that is related that I'll also do. And then there's another small thing. It's not actually related, but it's just really small. It's one line, so I might as well do it in this thing. Actually, I just need to change the same thing in a bunch of files, and it's a really easy change. I'm just changing one character in a whole bunch of files. I don't really want to make a ticket just for that and make a pull request just to do that. So I'm just going to go and throw that in with the ticket I'm already working on. And while I'm at it, I can actually clean this part up too, because that's related, and that's scope creep. I started off with something that should have been a 100-line change, and I ended up with, in 2 files, and I ended up with a 3,000-line change across 30 files. And it's just a lot of really tiny things that didn't really matter. That just, is lots of little tiny polish and cleanup and, detail work that's good, that should be done, but it's scope creep. Or, I have a ticket to do one thing, and there's a feature, an epic, right? And there's one story that's vaguely defined, and I start working on it, and I do way too much work in that one ticket. I should have broken that work up into 2 or 3 other tickets and done 2 or 3 PRs, because it just ends up being a huge amount of work to review, and that could have been broken up because could have been scoped out into different chunks. And had it been planned out better, had we actually discussed tasks that need to be done on it, we could have maybe broken that down in smaller chunks. And that 8-pointer could have maybe been turned into several, two or three, maybe three pointers, and a 1-pointer or a 2-pointer. It could have been broken down to smaller, easier to do chunks that could have been done quicker and been easier to review. So that's the idea of scope creep. Woo! We spent a lot of time on terminology, didn't we? Let's talk about roles, and I'll try to talk faster. So here we have a bunch of little people. We got little like dark red people and blue people. We got some like pale yellow and some green. Bunch of different people all kind of hanging around. They all work at the same company. We have grouped these two different groupings into teams. So we're going to say all these people at the top, they are all on one team, and all these people at the bottom, they are on a different team. And maybe that each team has a specific piece of software that they maintain, or a few different softwares, or maybe a suite of software. And that's what they work on at the company, and that's their whole thing. Maybe one team is in charge of Google Maps and Google Earth, and the other team is in charge of Gmail, right? Or something else, if you want to think about it in any of those different ways. Maybe one team is at Spotify and their job is on recommendations. The other teams, their job is on advertising, whatever, right? There's different teams that work on different products and different projects. Inside each of these teams, we have squads, which is just this is the squad is what most people think of when they think of a team. I work on a team of 4 or 5 people or 6 people or 2 people or whatever. That's my team. But really, the team is going to be greater than that at most companies. And the squad is the one that's really focused on one specific thing. So maybe that top team is working on a suite of projects, but there's one team, one squad inside of it that focuses on just one part of one piece of that suite of software. They pick on just one program in it, or just one part of one program. And so if we look at these different colors, we can say maybe each of these represents a different role. So maybe dark red is like a back-end dev, blue would be like a front end, this green would maybe be like a QA person, this yellow might be like a UX person. And so we can see like different teams have different people of different roles and different things. We have different squads, and each squad may have a different makeup for how many people represent each different role. And there may be some full stack people or whatever, right? This is just to convey ideas. So yeah, we've got this, and just by looking at these squads, we can see, okay, I can start making some guesses. Like this squad has 2 front end and 2 UX. This is probably a very design heavy people who aren't doing much with connecting to data. They're just designing stuff. Maybe they're doing email marketing or something, and there's no data really being involved. They're just doing a lot of design work and programming around those designs. This team, this squad up here is all back end. So maybe their job is to be the database admins and to make sure that all the database code that all the other backend people are submitting meets all the certain requirements and has all the security protocols in place. Or maybe their job is to set up the public-facing API that other companies pay to access. Or maybe it's a free one, like GitHub has an API that's free that people can access. So you can kind of see like, okay, this is 2 backend, 2 front end, 2 QA. They're probably working on an actual application that people will use. So you kind of get an idea just by looking at the team makeup for the specific squads. Now, there's another thing you may hear, another role or a group. These are all groups, and that is guilds. And a guild is typically made up of a bunch of people who are all the same or similar role, So here we see a front-end guild. So there's all these front-end people, and it stretches across multiple squads and maybe multiple teams across the company. And it's usually a ground-up endeavor where the company did not create this guild. Someone who works at the company who does front-end work decided, I would like to start a guild at the company. And so they create an email list and they say, anyone who wants to be on it, let me know. We're going to have these meetings. We're going to meet up in the cafeteria next to the TV, and we're going to talk about front end stuff once a week for, around lunchtime, because that's when everyone will be free on their schedule. Or we'll do a once every other week video call where anyone can call in and join. And as you can see, not every front end person is in this guild. There's everyone in this squad is, one person that one is, no one from this one joined. And it doesn't have to be front end people. Like here, this back end person is somewhat interested in front end. Maybe they're a full stack person or thinking about being one. And so they're interested and they join in. So that's the idea of a guild. It's usually a grassroots initiative. It can be a good way to stay up to date with what's going on in the industry, with what's going on with your career, learning about new things, seeing what other people are trying out on their teams and on their squads. Say like, hey, we're trying out this new testing approach, and this is what we've learned so far. We're doing visual regression testing. Here's the tools we're doing. Or I created this tool, and this is what I use it for, and you can try it out. I made a tool to make my job easier. You guys also do the same work I do, so maybe you can use this tool also. So that's the idea of a guild. It's just a way to have this kind of cross-squad pollination and communication, and know what's going on, what other people are working on, and what's going on in the industry, and hearing about interesting stuff. So we have roles and groups. We talked about the teams. These are often called a Scrum team. There are squads. Sometimes if you're on a small enough team, your entire team is the squad. You work on a team, you work at a small company, and there's 5 people in the entire company, right? So your squad and your team are the same thing. And a lot of companies will have teams that grow bigger and bigger and bigger, and they get big enough that they need to break them up into squads. And so that's where that delineation comes from. So you may actually hear people just use the word team, but if you hear squad, that's what it is. It's a squad is a smaller chunk of a bigger team. And then the guilds are that cross stuff. A scrum of scrums, if I go back to that previous screen, a scrum of scrums is a meeting of people, usually the leadership of different teams or different squads across different teams coming together to discuss something. So this is usually when the site, the people who work on the website and the people who work on the mobile app need to have some type of communication around how data will be structured and shared between these two teams. And so they need some way of getting a routine communication set up around that. The whole Scrum of Scrum things is something that a lot of companies haven't really established a great solid approach to yet. So there's a lot of people who are still experimenting and finding ways to have this cross-team communication and to have this higher level of hierarchy of getting things to kind of work across multiple teams. It's a hard thing to solve. There's just a lot of people and a lot of different goals and a lot of different projects that all need to communicate, and they all have different goals that they're working towards, and it's hard to get everyone on the same page. So that's just difficult in general. We have a few different roles here that I'm going to mention: product owner, scrum master, stakeholder, and project owner. We're getting closer to the end, just so you guys know. I know that I've been talking for a while and I'm spending a lot of time on each slide, but we're getting there. So a product owner is the person whose concern is making sure that the big picture of the product is being planned out, and they talk to the end users who will actually be involved with it and other stakeholders. So a stakeholder is anyone who has a stake in this project, be they the end user that will be using it, or be they executives at the company, or higher ups. A product owner is usually considered a stakeholder. Um, or they could be the venture capitalists, the people who are funding this project, right? And they have a stake in this project working out well also. They don't actually care about using the software, but they care that the software is good for other people to use. So those are your stakeholders. They're anyone who has a stake in the project you're working on. The product owner would be one of them, and that person also talks to all the stakeholders and makes sure that the project and the product that you're working on is headed in the right direction. And their main job is to prioritize and to say no. That's their main job. Their main job is to talk to the user. The user says, man, I really love this car that you guys are building, but it'd be really cool if the horn did this and was on the outside, and there was a bubble dome around it, and there was a front and a back seat, and I'm describing a car designed by Homer from The Simpsons. But you know, they may say like, hey, I love this software that you're creating, but it'd be really cool if the background was a candy stripe color like peppermint. And it's the product owner's job to say, I understand why you want that, but we're not going to do that. I'm going to tell you no. And sometimes it's legitimate stuff of like, hey, I use the software this way and I need this feature for it to be more efficient for me. And they can look at that and say, that makes perfect sense, but most people use the software this other way, and we're already going down a path to please 90% of people, and we can't go down that path and also add that feature that you want. Those two things are not compatible. So we're not going to do that. And if that means that you need to find a workaround with the new system when it comes out, or you need to use a different product, I'm sorry, but like we can't go that route. So that's the product owner. Their job is to talk to them, find out what their concerns are, find out their needs are. If they have a lot of people telling them, hey, I really need this thing, then they should probably stop saying no and say, okay, how can we actually solve this problem these users have? What is their actual problem, and how can we solve that for them? The Scrum Master is a term for whoever is running these meetings, these Scrum meetings, these Agile meetings. And we'll talk about those meetings next after this. But that's what their job is. They're the people who are running the meetings and talking with people, making sure they're scheduled and ran well, and that people are getting a lot of stuff out of them. And if people aren't, what things can we change about these meetings? Can we change when the meetings occur? Can we, maybe these meetings just aren't needed at all. We can drop that type of meeting, and maybe we identify a problem that is happening and we can pull in stuff. So they can say, a Scrum Master's main job is to say, in traditional Agile Scrum, you would do this. This is how we would do things. This is the correct, quote, correct way that Agile is prescribed. So we can try that approach and see if that works for us. And we'll try it for 1 or 2 sprints and see if that works. And if it doesn't, we'll stop doing it. Or if it does, then we'll keep doing it. Or if it does, but we need to tweak it some to work better for our team, then we can have those discussions and do that. So that's kind of the Scrum Master's job. They are typically not hired as a Scrum Master. They are typically hired as a lead developer or an architect or a team manager, right? And on top of that, they will fulfill the duty of a Scrum Master as well as part of their role as whatever their job title actually is. And then there's a project owner. That project owner is something who's usually more technical than the product owner. The product owner's job is more to talk to people and to prioritize. The project owner is to make sure that work is actually being done and that it's being planned out properly, and that we actually do know roughly how long things will take, and that stuff is organized well, and that things are story pointed, and that people are happy with the team and so on, and the process and the team and the project and all that. Sometimes a team will only have a project owner. Sometimes it'll only have a product owner. Sometimes it'll have both. Sometimes it'll have neither. And someone will just kind of fill in parts of those roles. Just depends on the size of the company, the size of the project, the size of the product, how many people are using it, etc. Okay, story lifecycle. I really love that little icon there, that little loopy loop with little dots inside of it. That's a simplified image that you will sometimes see for agile graphs to represent an iteration. Okay, story lifecycle. This is, I think, the last big slide to go over. Creation. So you create a new story or a new ticket, a new issue, and the things that you would normally fill out. You would need to decide when creating this new story, is this a bug? Is this a chore like tech debt? Or is this a feature? It's new work that needs to be done. Is this, what status do you put this in? And that could be triage, that could be backlog, that could be current sprints, that could be priority, that could be in progress. If there's a thing that needs to be, you find a bug and you know it's going to be really quick and easy to fix, you already started working on it, now you need to make a ticket for it, you may put it directly to in progress. A title, you need to give your ticket a title of some kind, and this should be direct, it should be concise, it should be easily searchable, definitely concise. It should be nice and short and should convey quickly what this ticket is about. Then you'd have a description. If this is a bug, then you would have steps to reproduce with your expected outcome if you do those steps, and then the actual outcome of the bug. If this is a chore, then you may have a description of the work that needs to be done and any roadblocks you expect to potentially run into when doing that work, like updating a dependency, for example. You may have some third-party code you pull in, like jQuery or Vue or something, and you need to update that dependency, and that may break some code. You need to rewrite stuff because it's a breaking change. You're going to a new major version. So you could document some of that stuff and say, or if you started in work on something and it was more work than expected and you went to go make a ticket for it, I was going to update all of our dependencies, but this one was really painful to update, so I bailed on it and updated all of the other ones and made a ticket for this because the work to do this one update is the same amount of effort to do all of the other updates. So I'll set that aside and I'll put in there, this is what happened when I tried to update it, so keep that in mind for whoever works on this ticket. And then maybe acceptance criteria of some kind, and maybe even testing instructions if you know far enough in advance what will need to be tested for it to work. And that testing instructions and that acceptance criteria may even be the same thing. Related stories, if there are other things related, if this is in a series of stories and it's dependent on something else being finished first. For example, if the story is add a save button to the user profile, you cannot work on that ticket until you do the previous ticket, which is create the user profile page. So you need to create the user profile page first, and until that ticket is done, you cannot start work on the next one to put a save button on the page. So you may have related stories, and you may relate those stories and say this is related to it, or this is blocked by it, or this is blocking a different one. Discussion. So after you have created your tickets, you may need to discuss those with your team, and your team will go through and they'll talk about the description and the title, and maybe the title will be reworded to be more clear to everyone. Maybe the description needs to be polished. Sometimes the description is completely empty and you just need to know what the title is about and then fill in the description afterwards as a team. Everything except for the title is optional, basically. So as a team, you may fill out the rest of that story, fill it out as a team, and then discuss it as a team and say, this is the work that needs to be done. Do we need to discuss with the users on this? Is this a front end or a back end ticket? How should we label it? How should we prioritize this? How do we point this? How much work is in it? So then you do your story pointing. You may discuss as a team, is this something that needs to get done eventually but doesn't matter when? If so, throw in the backlog. If this is something that needs to get done immediately, okay, we need to put that in current sprint. Is this something that needs to be done, but it doesn't need to be done this sprint, but we need to get to it in the next couple of weeks? Okay, we'll throw that in priority. You may assign it to someone. You may say, this is something that so and so should definitely work on, or this is something that I want to work on, so I will assign it to myself. You may fill out any tasks in it. Sometimes you do that, sometimes you don't. Tasks are often something that doesn't get written in tests in tickets. It's something that's often left out. But if you're that kind of person, you find that valuable or useful for you, it can be a really good practice to write out tasks. And then you may need to split up or combine stories. So you may say, okay, we've discussed it, we understand the ticket, we've pointed it, but it's a really big point. Is there any way that we can break this into smaller stories and do them incrementally so they'll be easier to get done faster and easier to review? Can we break this up so it's not a ton of work for just one person to do? Or you may say, actually, this is related to another ticket. Uh, we should probably combine those two. It makes sense to combine those two tickets together and do them all in one go. Or you may say, um, actually, this will close another ticket, so we should pull that one into Sprint also and make sure to test it so that when this is finished, that both of these were marked as completed. Or we have a ticket that says change the color of the button to blue, and this ticket is called remove the button. So we should just archive that other ticket or delete the other ticket. So because we know this one is going to completely negate the other one's existence. Okay, so now we get the story life cycle in pictures. I mentioned that Agile has many different approaches. It has many different implementations. What I'm showing you here is the board that I use at work. And this is a board that we slowly developed over the course of 3 years, and we added in and we removed different lanes as we found use for them. And this is what we've been using for about a year and a half now, maybe a year and a quarter of another year. So this has lasted the longest of all of our different changes, and we're pretty happy with where it's at right now and this workflow that we've come up with for our team. But different teams will have different lanes, they'll have different approaches, different workflows. So expect it to look different on different teams. But this is what I'm going to walk you through because this is actually a little bit more complex than most of the examples you'll find. And I feel like this is a good example of that to see a more complex one. So I've got a bunch of different little pale yellow rectangles, and those represent different stories. We have a triage lane that we use at work where throughout the course of a week or throughout the course of a sprint, we will um, we will run into bugs, or we will come up with ideas or features or additional work that needs to get done. And so then we will go and create a new ticket quickly. We'll type in a title, maybe flesh out the description a little bit, maybe check some of the boxes or whatever, but we'll just get something out there and flesh it out as much as we want. And then we throw that into our triage lane. And this is something where you don't need to think about it, you don't need to discuss it, you don't need to decide where it goes, you don't need to fill out the ticket entirely, you just write it down. It's kind of just a sticky note of, oh yeah, we need to talk about this as a team and figure out what we're going to do with this work. How do we want to prioritize that work? How do we want to organize it? So we throw things into this lane throughout the course of a week. And then the first day of a sprint, we go through and we do triage review. And we say, okay, I'm going to move this dark yellow here to our backlog. I'm going to move this pale white one over here to priority. And I'm going to take this dark blue one. I'm going to put this in current sprint, right? So this is at the top of backlog. That's at the top of priority. We decided that's where these things should go. This one actually needs to be worked on right now. So I'm going to take this current sprint one here, this dark blue one. I'm going to start working on it. So I'm going to move that over to in progress. I have created a branch for that locally. I've started to work on it. I've pushed up commits to GitHub. I may have even created a draft pull request. And when I create that draft pull request, the tool that I use, which is called Clubhouse, will actually move it over for me automatically, which is really nice. And then I work on that and I get my ticket done and I go through my checklist of all of the stuff, make sure the testing is passing, and I've written all the tests that I need to. My linting is good, and I've updated the permissions for the users, and I've done all of this work. Oh, we have a question, I think. Someone's typing. So I've done all of that, and my ticket's basically done. So I'm going to move it to ready for review. So now it's in this ready for review lane, and someone's going to look at that. Note to self, ask what's the difference between a draft pull request and pull request. In GitHub, it's a new feature they added, and it literally lets you put up a pull request that cannot be merged. And it will actually be a gray color. It'll be grayed out to say that this is still being worked on. And it's a way for other people to actually take a look at the diff in your code and look at it while it's in progress and give early feedback before you're actually finished. And then when you are finished, you can click a button that says ready for review, and it will actually turn it to a regular pull request. And at that point, it can be merged. But before then, you can't merge it in. That's all it is. It's just a UI distinction. Yeah, it's a really nice feature. I'm glad they added it in because we were just doing that by hand. And it's like a year and a half ago they added that feature in, I think. Okay, so I have done all the work. I'm happy with it. I think I'm done. I'm going to put this up for ready for review, and I move it to this lane here. And this tells everyone else on the team, hey, you can go and review. These are the things that need to be code reviewed. So the team will say, okay, this is Jared's ticket. It needs to be worked on. It needs to be reviewed. So I'm going to go look at it. I'm going to add some code comments. Then Jared, myself, I will go back and look at those comments. I will address those comments, fix whatever things they found, clean up whatever, rename a variable if it wasn't clear, whatever they have, whatever things they want to say. Once that's good and they've approved it, then I will merge that into our master branch. And when it's merged to master, our continuous integration server, our CI, it will see that master had a new thing merged into it. And it will automatically do a new build on the master branch and deploy that to our dev environment. And so at work, we have 3 environments, which is the ideal way to work, to have a dev environment, a test environment, and a production environment. Some places don't have a dev environment or a test, and you just need to figure it out on your own. Some places only have a dev environment. But the main idea is these are 3 different places that may have different versions of code and will all have their own databases with unique data in them. So the dev data, you can do whatever you want. You can delete whatever you want. You can create whatever you want. It doesn't matter. Prod data, don't touch it. That's actual customer data. That is someone else's information. It may be private. There may be legal consequences to even seeing their data if you don't have the proper job role. And of course, deleting their stuff is very bad, even if it's completely public information that anyone can see. Deleting it could still very much upset the people who are paying you, and then they may not want to pay you anymore, and you go out of business. So, prod data, don't touch it. But dev data is nice, and that's where most development work is done. You do lots of dev work in dev. Even when I'm developing code locally, I'm proxying against our dev database. So I'm getting the same data that I would see in dev. And then we have a test environment, which is where you don't have all of your crazy, silly dev data, where, this is the test environment where you can actually go through and try things out fresh and see what stuff looks like. So at work, my code was reviewed, it was approved, I merged it in master. Our continuous integration tool, our CI, saw that merge, it did a build, it automatically deployed to the dev environment. Now, as a team, twice a week, we will, it used to be every Tuesday, Thursday, now it's every Wednesday, Friday. We will sit down in the morning, and as a team for about 30 to 45 minutes, we will go through each one of these issues that is deployed to dev, and we will say, let's each whoever didn't work on the ticket, one person will pull that over to dev QA. So this ticket was done by Gwen, so I'm going to pull that over. All right, this dark one's mine. So Gwen's going to pull that one in, and she's going to QA that one. And I'm going to pull her ticket in, and I'm going to QA that one. And the QA is just, let me see if I can break this. I'm going to read the instructions and read what the ticket was about. I'm going to try to reproduce stuff and make sure it works as intended. And then I'm going to try to break it and do everything I can to make it not work and find any edge cases I can come up with and do whatever I can to make this thing break. And if I can break it, then either we need to move that ticket back to in progress and fix that, or we need to create a bug ticket for it. It depends on whether or not it's okay to move forward. If we deploy that to prod, would that be okay? And sometimes the answer is, oh no, you don't want to deploy that to prod until we fix that. And sometimes the answer is, yeah, it's probably fine. That's a really rare edge case that it's going to be pretty unlikely anyone to run into. But we should still, fix that bug really soon and get that in maybe later today or tomorrow. Get that bug fixed before people run into it. So that's where we're at now. Okay, so I reviewed Gwen's, Gwen reviewed mine. We both QA'd each other, our tickets, and we said, this is good. And then we will deploy those tickets to test. So they both got deployed. They've both been deployed to test. And now Shannon is going to go and pull in one of these. She's going to pull mine in and she's going to start queuing it. I'm not going to QA my own ticket because I wrote the thing, so someone else needs to QA it. And then we'll make Clara QA Gwen's ticket. So Clara's going to QA that one. Shannon's going to QA this one. And then, they're going to go through and try and break it also. And this is really good to have. We found that it works really well to have two sets of eyes QAing the ticket because you'll find that one person may test it in a completely different way than another person. Or, especially if I worked on the ticket and Gwen reviewed it, and then Shannon didn't even know about this ticket, and it's the first time she's reading it, the first time she's understanding what's going on, and she may completely understand it differently and start testing stuff in a way that neither one of us would have because she didn't see what the code looked like. Because we could look at the code and say, well, okay, I don't need to test that because obviously that wouldn't break because I know how the code works. And then Shannon doesn't know how the code works, so she'd hop in and start testing it and then be like, hey, how come this breaks? And we'd be like, oh, yeah, that makes sense why that breaks. We didn't think about that. Good catch. And then we create a ticket for that and fix whatever broke. And sometimes it's just like usability. It's just like, it's not like I click this and I click that and then an error is thrown. Sometimes it's like, as a user, I'm really confused by the wording here and I thought this meant something else. And it's like, oh, that's a good point. We didn't think about that. We should reword that to make that more clear. Or as a user, I would expect my workflow to be A, B, C, and D, and this does A, D, D, C, C, B, A. Could we change it to be simpler? And it's like, oh yeah, that would be a lot simpler. We'll make a ticket to simplify that and make the interaction and the layout easier to understand. So sometimes it's just someone's fresh pair of eyes looking at it. Okay, so Shannon and Clara are both done. They've QA'd it. They say it's good. Okay, let's deploy to prod. Boom, and now we're done. Those two issues were deployed to prod. They are now in production. Our users can use them. And then finally at the end, we see the archive. We talked a little bit earlier about how, if you have a ticket that says make the red button blue, and you have another ticket that says remove the red button, then, if you do the remove the red button ticket, the make it blue can just be archived. It's no longer needed. Or you used to have a feature that you were going to implement, but now you've decided that we're not going to go down that path, so you archive it so there's still record that that was planned out and what the plan was. In case we ever do want to go down that path again, we can take it out of the archive, but that's the archives for. It's just kind of like stuff that doesn't need to be in backlog because we're never going to do that work. Okay, so zoomed out, here's what that board looked like. We have a triage lane, we have a backlog, we have a priority, there's the current sprint, there's the progress, in progress, ready for review, the deployed to dev and test, and the dev QA and the test QA. There's the done, there's the archive. This is the big zoomed out row. This is a Kanban board. And if you were practicing actual Kanban, it would look approximately the same. The difference is you don't really have a current sprint. You have a priority, and your backlog may be the same thing, and just everything that's in priority is at the very top of the backlog. And then you have your stuff that's in progress, and you pull whatever the top thing off of priority or the top thing off of backlog into your in progress lane. Kanban is usually the Scrum approach where you're planning out all the work you're going to be doing in a specific iteration of time in a specific sprint. That Scrum approach is typically used when you have a big project that you're working on and you have a decent idea of what this project is going to look like when it's done. Kanban is good when you don't know what the end of the result is going to look like when it's done. So Kanban is really useful for people who are doing exception tasks. Like their whole job is to just, oh, I got a message from Gwen. Okay, everything's fine. You're cool, Gwen. Yeah, the Kanban is really good if you're doing something like exception tasks where your job is to solve problems that other people come to you with, and you don't know what problems they're going to come to you with, how many you're going to get at a given time. So, if you work in an IT department and your job is to fix the computers and the systems, the issues people have, the IT problems, then people make tickets, and you need to prioritize the highest priority tickets and to pull those in. And so there, it's more of a focus not on how big the tickets are, but how high priority they are. Is this a thing that needs to be done in the next 15 minutes because prod is down? Is this a thing where it needs to be done in the next hour because some other thing is a major issue? Is this a major client that we need to make happy and needs to be fixed in the next day? Is this something that needs to be fixed in the next 2 or 3 days or the next week or whatever? So you'd put a deadline on it as to when the thing came in and when the latest it can be finished at. And you can sort by the deadline or you can sort by priority, and then pull those things in. And that's how you prioritize stuff and you try to get through that workload. And that's sometimes the case. And that's what a Kanban board is really good for, this Kanban approach, where you just pull off the top thing of priority and you're always working on it. And whatever stuff is in progress, whatever that state is in, however many items are in there on average, that is your WIP limit. And you will often hear WIP limit associated with a Kanban approach. You'll hear that a lot more often than with a Scrum approach, where story points are more often the case. Okay, ceremonies. I think this is the last big slide, or maybe even the last slide. Yeah, this is the last one. So there are different ceremonies in Agile. There's Agile ceremonies. There is Standup, which is done every day. That's where as a team you talk about what you did yesterday, what you're going to work on today, anything that's blocking you. The idea is that your stand-up should take somewhere between like 15 seconds and like 2 or 3 minutes tops. If you're going to like the 5-minute range, then someone will say parking lot, because that probably means that you are talking to one other person about something specific, and the two of you can just take that offline after the stand-up. You can go off and talk to each other on their own, and sometimes you'll hear the term parking lot in reference to that. Ticket triage and review. So we talked about ticket review or triage review. The triage review is you go through that triage lane and you do it. The ticket review is it can happen during your sprint planning or your backlog grooming. Backlog grooming is something that can either be done with the entire team or ideally your product owner will go through the backlog and clean up the backlog, remove things out that need to be archived, stuff that's no longer relevant. They will reprioritize stuff and move things around so that the higher priorities are at the top and they're prioritized well. And the closer you get to the top, the more granular the prioritization has become. Um, and they may mark down a bunch of notes of stuff where they don't know the correct answer during their process of doing the grooming. And so then they will bring those tickets specifically to the team as a whole to discuss, to talk about and to story point or to add more detail to, um, and to get a better idea as to what that work will look like and how they can better prioritize it. Sprint planning is exactly what it sounds like. It is when you are going to plan out the next iteration of time. So the next 1 week sprint or the next 2 week sprint, or 3 or 6 or whatever. Like I said, most places do 2 week sprints. If it's a brand new team where nobody's really worked with each other before, it's pretty common to do 1 week sprints for a few months to kind of get down a good idea of a cycle with everybody and understand where we're at, and to rapidly iterate on how the team dynamic works and what you work on as a team. But after that period of time, it's really common to switch over to a 2 week sprint. There is so the sprint planning is, we know that the team on average pulls in about this much work, so we're going to pull in that much work, and we'll take it off the top and we'll decide, this is the highest priority stuff that needs to be worked on in the next 2 weeks. It needs to be done in the next 2 weeks. So we'll pull all that in. Demo is a process where you get all of your stakeholders in the same room or on the same voice video call, and you demonstrate the changes that have happened recently. So you demo all of the code that got merged into prod in the last 2 weeks or whatever. So you demo all those things, and you also get their feedback and say, this is what we actually built. Is this what you wanted? Is this how you expected it to work? Or we're in the process of this, and this is where we're at currently. This isn't actually deployed to prod yet, but this is the direction we're going in. Is this correct? Is this what you would expect? And to make sure that everyone's on the same page and they know what new stuff has been delivered, what things are currently being worked on, and they can have discussions around, well, what should the workflow be like in this scenario, or how would you guys prefer this to work, or how are you currently doing it, so that we can, better, codify that process for you. So that's what the demo is for. There is a sprint review, which is where, as a team, you talk about all of the tickets that you worked on and which ones were harder than others, when you ran into problems, when you ran into issues, what things did you not expect, or what things should we change in our process around tickets and around doing the actual work of our jobs. Then we have a retro, which stands for a sprint retrospective, where you think back on the sprint and you talk about things. And that may be the same thing as a sprint review on some teams, where you talk about the work that you did, the tickets. But the retro is also meant to encompass social aspects as well, and process aspects. So you can say things like, I really don't like the tone that so and so said this thing about, or I feel like I'm being left out of these conversations. I heard that these 3 people had a meeting on this topic, and I wasn't invited to that, and I would have liked to be invited to that. Or it could be things like, when I pulled in this ticket, I had overestimated where it was at, or I really struggled to get collaboration from these people on this other squad or on this other team for them to work. I needed their help on this because it's interacting with their application, and it was really difficult to get a hold of them and to work on that. And it's a time to talk about process also, and say, we've been doing our backlog grooming this past sprint was 4 hours long, and I felt like through most of it, I wasn't needed. I'm a front end developer, and 3 of those 4 hours were discussing back end topics. And the front end stuff was intermixed in that. And if we had just done front end for the first hour and then back end after that, I could have left and gotten 3 hours of work done. But instead, I was in there trying to get work done, but being distracted because every 20 minutes or so, I would have to be paying attention for some front end related ticket that we were doing grooming on. So that was, that's a process thing where you can say, okay, well, as a process, um, let's also discuss why are we spending 4 hours in backlog grooming? Do we need every person on the team to sit in this room for 4 hours and discuss this, or can the manager or the product owner or the project manager, can that person go through and do the grooming on their own in advance and then only bring the tickets that we need team input on to the team, and maybe take this from a 4 hour process down to uh, 3 hours for one person and 1 hour for everybody else. That's a process thing where you can discuss and say, I realize that we've been having a lot of issues with this before, or I think the way we're doing, I think um, we've recently had a lot of tickets that were pulled into sprints that weren't actually ready to be worked on. Maybe we should develop a definition of ready, right? Or if you don't know what that is, you can identify the problem and say we keep having this issue, and then whoever's role it is to be the scrum master would then say, traditionally in Agile, there is a concept of a definition of ready. And then they can explain what that concept is. And then they can say, we can try this out. And, what aspects do we want to define for that? And we can see if we like this approach or not, and see if it solves the problem or if it just becomes extra paperwork that we don't like doing. Or I've been doing a lot of extra paperwork that I don't like doing. Can we reduce that paperwork? So that's the kind of idea that retro is about. It's a discussion of process. It's a discussion of behavior and human interactions between people on the team. And it's meant to be very candid and open and transparent, so that there's no passive aggressive stuff that's being bottled up. And this one guy always leaves these really mean comments on all of my PRs. I really hate that guy and so mean. Oh, hey, how you doing? Hey, buddy, yeah. And you never talk about that and get that off your chest, because that person may not realize that you're interpreting their very direct um, messages of this is wrong, do this instead. They're being very strict and pragmatic about how they're explaining the issue, and they're not meaning it to be mean. They're just doing it to be direct and to save time. Uh, and they didn't realize that you were interpreting it that way. So it's like a thing where, you know, it's often just miscommunication that leads to those kind of team squabbles. And if you can do a regular discussion as a team around team issues and behavioral stuff, that solves a lot of stuff. Okay, QA is where, as a team, you QA the stuff. As we talked earlier, you try the code out, try to break it. One-on-ones is usually you and your boss, you and your manager, and you schedule that, and it's usually like half an hour to an hour, and you talk about what stuff you're working on currently, what things you're struggling with. I had this conversation with so and so the other day, and they asked me this question, and my response, I felt like I don't like the way I handled that. I felt like it was too curt. I was a little rude in my response, and I wish I could have handled that better. And then your boss can be like, yeah, I saw when that happened. In the future, you could try doing this instead, or asking this, or you can say, oh, that's a good point. I'm glad you said that. Or you could bring up and be like, yeah, I was working with this other person, and we had a lot of problems with communication, and I feel like I'm struggling with this. I don't know how to do better in this situation. And your boss can say, oh, don't worry about that. Literally every person I've had a one-on-one with has said the same thing about that person. That's not you. I'm working with that person to get them better. They are aware of the problem and they're going to try stuff, but I think you're doing okay. So it's a way for your boss to kind of to talk to them about your team and your own interpersonal interactions with the people. It's also a way to talk about your career progression and say, you know, my next role that I'd like to work up to is this, and I don't think that I'm ready for that yet. I feel like I'm still working on the role that I have currently and like mastering that, but I would like to take on some small little tasks from that other role to kind of get a taste for it and to kind of work my way into it more. And your boss should hopefully, keep your career progression in mind and find ways to give you that stuff and say, I'm doing front end work. I'm a junior dev and I'd like to get to a mid level as a front end, but I'd also like to eventually become full stack. So if there's any really small things that I can do in the back end, first off, they're going to say, well, let's get your backend environment set up on your computer. And then we can start feeding you a few small things like text changes and stuff. So you can kind of get your feet wet in that code base, and you can start to ask questions and we'll start pulling you into back end meetings so you can start to hear us talking about it. And as you feel more comfortable, we can start pulling in smaller tickets and those tickets get bigger over time as you feel more comfortable. So those are kind of things you can talk about from career progression standpoint during your one-on-ones with your boss. And as I said, these can range in time. Some of them are like 15, 20 minutes if you have really nothing to say. But usually they're like a half an hour to an hour. It just depends. But there's no real time box on them. They usually schedule them for like an hour. So let's look at what this looks like. So here we have two different weeks. We got this first week, Monday through Friday, and the second week, Monday through Friday. You'll notice that there's stand-up happens every day. It's the first thing that happens. Stand-up is usually like 15 minutes long. On Monday, each Monday, we're doing triage review. On the first Monday of the sprint, we will also do backlog grooming. The next day, we'll do QA, and we'll do QAs on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. On the Friday, I have a one-on-one scheduled, right? And your boss may have one-on-one scheduled throughout the week with each person on the team or on the squad, or they may just do them all back-to-back on one day. They may have one day where they have a huge block of time that's free where they don't have any meetings, so they'll fill that whole day up with one-on-ones back-to-back. So yeah, that just depends on whoever's doing the one-on-ones. And you may also have a one-on-one with your grand boss, so your boss's boss, and those are usually a lot more rare. You'll do those a couple times a year, just to or you can schedule one if you feel like your boss is not doing it for you. You can message your grand boss and say, hey, can we do a one-on-one at some point? Can you schedule me in for one? And they'll say, yeah, sure, and they'll just pencil you in, and then you can go talk to them and talk to them about whatever higher level issues you have that aren't going on, that aren't being addressed by your current boss, or maybe tell them your current boss is awesome and just wanted to tell him he's really good. I don't know. Yeah, so then we're in the second week here. The last Thursday of the week, we'll do a demo for the user. So most of the work should have been finished up by that week. There's a QA that morning, so we may have pushed all the work out into prod, and then you can demo that work to them. And then the last day of the sprint, there's a sprint review and retro and a sprint planning. And now again, all of these things, this is just one representation. This doesn't actually reflect what I do at work. Our schedule is a little bit different from this, but this is just trying to give you an idea of stuff. And as a team, during your review, your sprint review and your retro, you can say, I think we should move these things around. Maybe we should only have triage review once a sprint. Maybe we should have backlog grooming on a different day. Or I think we have too many meetings on this last Friday. I'm not getting anything done or whatever, And then there's a sprint planning. So you plan the next sprint on the last day of the previous sprint. Some people do it on the last day of the current sprint. You'll plan for the next one. Some people do it on the first day of the sprint. You'll plan for the rest of the sprint. But that's a rough idea of a schedule, what this kind of looks like. And sometimes you may say, hey, this day's got a lot of meetings in it, so we're going to skip stand-up on that day, and we're just going to go straight into review. And our stand-up will be kind of part of the sprint review. And then after that review, we'll go into the retro. And then after lunch, we'll come back into sprint planning or something. So, you may skip stand-up on some days. Not every team, not every squad does stand-up every day. Some do it every other day. Some do it only 2 days a week. Some don't do stand-up at all, but stand-up is definitely the most common agile ceremony. It's used all the time. Planning and backlog grooming are the next two most common things, and then retro. And then after that, the rest of the stuff is really just like stuff that may or may not happen. Some places will say that they do one-on-ones, but they actually almost never do. They don't really schedule them. Some places don't have a triage lane at all, so they don't do triage review. Yeah, and then some places don't actually demo either. They just push the prod, and there's no one to demo to. But yeah, this is the idea here. This is a rough sketch of what a common agile workflow would look like in a given sprint. Okay, then we have some resources. There's the Agile Manifesto, which you mentioned earlier, which is from literally the year 2001. That website has never been updated. It's crazy. Agile product ownership in a nutshell. This video is amazing. It's a 20-minute video. Go watch it. It'll explain a lot of the stuff in greater detail from a higher level perspective and has really nice visual illustrations to explain the concepts. Clubhouse is a project management tool. It's like Trello, but better and more advanced. It's like Jira, but less advanced and easier, much easier. So I really like that one. I did some terminology for the Agile stuff, and there is an Agile terminology dictionary, which has like 500 words in it. So we covered like 10. So there's a lot. User story mapping, that's a blog post. Mountain Goat software. This has, if you're really into Agile and you want to do project management and be a Scrum Master and get Agile certified, go start watching these videos. There's a lot of them that are on there for free. And then the other ones, you can get your company to pay for it if you really want to go down that path. But Mountain Goat software is from one of the guys who was at the Agile Manifesto weekend retreat and helped create Agile. So he makes this great tutorial videos on that stuff. Cool. There is a link to slides. Yeah, so that's the Agile stuff. Any questions on all of that? I know we kind of went, we're under 2 hours from when the talk started, but that was a lot of stuff. Any questions on that stuff?
No, that was great. I loved it, every single minute of it. I did have one small question. When it comes to assigning user stories, is that something that is chosen by the individual, or is that something that like the team lead says you should probably work on this, or is it a little bit of both?
It's if you are a junior developer, or even if you're not, if you're a senior developer and you're just new to a team, then the team will typically, the people who are already on the team will pick tickets for you for your first like couple of weeks, the first month, maybe month and a half, and it will slowly they'll be picking fewer and fewer tickets specifically for you, and those tickets are going to be really tiny, easy baby tickets, basically. So that's when someone else will be assigning them to you, and it's just because we know as a team the code base really well, and we know that this is a part of the code base you haven't touched yet, so it'd be good to get you in to start playing with that part. This is another place you haven't touched yet. This is just a really easy one, and so you can start doing that because you've got a lot of like catch up just to learn the code base, let alone do the work. So you usually don't throw anything big and heavy at someone for the first month. So that's when you'd be assigned stuff, and that's good. That's good. Oftentimes, if you're doing a really Kanban approach, nothing is assigned. You get your work done, and you look at the very highest priority thing, and you see what the story point on that is, and you say, first off, can I do that work? Like if I'm a front end dev and that's a back end ticket, then I'm not going to do that. And then if that is work I can do, can I do that much work? Is it a 2-pointer? That's pretty easy. I can get that done today. Or is it an 8-pointer? No, that's going to take me a whole week or more, so I'm not going to pull that one in, right? So you start at the top and you work your way down until you find the highest priority ticket that you can actually pull in. And then in a true Kanban approach, you would pull that over and it would be assigned to you automatically, and you'd start working on it. So every person just pulls stuff in when they are ready to pull a new thing in, and they pull the highest priority thing that they can. That's true Kanban. In true Agile, you would, as a team during sprint planning, say, I'll take on that ticket. You can go and assign that to me. And then they'll go through and they'll say, well, this ticket needs to get done. Who wants this? And someone will volunteer for it. Or the team will say, I think the new person should probably take that one. That's a good one for them. Um, you know, and so you go through and people just kind of volunteer for the work that they want to do. And then at the end, they're like, okay, so we're trying to pull in 40 story points. We're at 38 right now. Should we pull in one more? And then someone on the team says, yeah, I only brought in one thing. So I'm going to definitely need 2 or 3 more things to be brought in. And so then they'll bring in 2 or 3 more things for that person, and then they'll reevaluate and say, okay, who has too much work then? Did we overload somebody? Because now we have a lot of points, and we normally only do 40, and we have 48. And then someone says, yeah, I'm probably not going to be able to get through all of the stuff that I've brought in. We can probably take this one off. And then they'll say, well, that's definitely got to get done. So can someone else do that? And we'll take one of their other tickets out. And then that's kind of the process. And that's what the sprint planning is like in a true Scrum environment. What I do at work, the way our team works, is a mix of that, where during sprint planning, we decide what work should be brought in. Some of those tickets people may call dibs on and put their face on it. And other stuff, we just put it into the current sprint lane, and it's unassigned, and you pull it in whenever you're available. And that way, as a team, we get about 40 story points done, but it's not individually split up equally across the team, because story points are something that can't really be split up equally, right? If you have a 1 pointer and a 1 pointer takes you 5 minutes, and you have an 8 pointer and an 8 pointer takes you 5 days, then I could do 8 1 pointers before lunch. And that is not equivalent to someone who did 1 8 pointer. Those are two very different things. So, it's really bad to score people on teams based off of how many story points they completed. Like if a boss is using it as a metric, you need to talk to them and explain why that's bad and why they should not be doing that. And most people know now that that's a really dumb idea, and you should not be using story points as a metric, other than to see, like, on average, how does the team as a whole do with story points in a sprint. So it's easier for like long-term planning point purposes, and to make sure that we keep track of like how much tech debt, how many story points of tech debt are we doing each sprint, to make sure that we're actually working towards cleaning up tech debt. So that's the kind of caveats around that. So yeah, good question though. It just varies from team to team, and the approach they're taking as to if it's assigned and when it's assigned.
I think my last question is, how long does it normally take to become familiar with a code base if you're new to a company?
It is extremely common for it to take at least 3 months. So, and that's a thing why it's really, really hard to get your first dev job, because if you don't have any experience doing dev work, someone can hire you on and they know you're not going to be productive for the first 3 months. No developer is going to be productive for the first 3 months, because there's just a lot of stuff that they need to get like used to and learn and get under their hood, especially if they're a junior dev, because they may not be familiar with a lot of the agile concepts, and like that's a whole thing that they'd have to learn. I just spent 2 hours teaching you that stuff, and usually you don't have 2 hours to teach a new person all of those things, and you may not have someone who's knowledgeable enough to do it. So it's something you kind of have to learn as you go. And so there's a lot of learning that's going to be happening, and a lot of especially learning the code base. And that may take you several months before you feel like you can take on most tickets and be effective and actually get some work done. So again, this is why it's so hard for people to get the first dev job, because if I hire you on and I know the first 3 months you're not going to be effective anyways, you're just going to be learning stuff, and then now you're actually doing stuff, and I give you some time to kind of actually do, show me what you're doing, and now it's 6 months in and you're just not working out, and I need to let go of you, then I just spent 6 months of money to get maybe a month's worth of productivity out of you, if you weren't really doing very well. that's a bad return on investment, right? I just spent 6 months of salary to get 1 month of work, of productivity. That's a bad investment. Um, so like if you've never worked as a dev before, I'm taking a big risk because I don't know if you can actually do this job. Now, once you do get a dev job, which is really hard to do to get your first one, and you work there for at least a year, then that means that if I hire you on, one, you know what you're doing. And if you leave after a year, then I got 9 months of productivity for 12 months of effort. That's not great, but it's okay. If you leave after 2 years, right, then I'm getting 2 years worth of productivity minus 3 months. You know, so that's the kind of deal that you have to think of in your head. If I see your work history and you've worked at the last 3 jobs totaled 15 years, then that's a great hire. If you work here for 5 years, man, that's a great return on investment. I got almost a full 5 years of productivity out of somebody. That's great. But if you quit jobs really fast, or you have very little, or the dev experience you do have was not a full year or more, then that's going to make me a little bit more nervous to hire you. So yeah, that's why it's really hard to get your first dev job, is because someone has to take that risk and give you that first dev job, and it's a risk to hire somebody if they haven't proven themselves, which is why I always tell people work on projects, get as many projects done as you can, and to completion, because that shows, look, I can finish what I start. I actually have code that I've worked on. You can look at it and see I know what I'm doing. So yeah. So with that said, any last questions on Agile stuff? I know we're definitely way over on time, and I don't want to keep you guys any later.
Hey, Jared, I just have a quick question though. How common are like unpaid internships for dev jobs?
Finding any internship is hard. Most of the time, the companies that do internships, they mostly just want to pull in recent graduates or people who are still in college, so they can snatch them up right out of college and get them for pretty cheap for a year or two, and hopefully snag them for the long term and they turn them into a full-time employee. So it's really hard getting an internship anywhere. There is also a lot of meetups that you can go to, and that's where every single person that I work with on my team, every person that I've ever helped get hired has been through a meetup. Every person I work with. My boss, I hired him from a meetup group. All of my coworkers I've worked at the company I'm at, they're all hired on from meetup groups. So I highly recommend, when the apocalypse is over, go out to as many meetups as you can. And in the meantime, join as many Discords and Slack channels as you can for different local coding meetup groups and get your name out there. All right, night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks so much for watching. Like always, if you have anything to add to this conversation, I would love to discuss it with you. Feel free to leave it in the comments below or join me over on my Discord chat to continue the conversation. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to this video and my channel if you are interested in more programming videos and videos like this that are tangentially related to programming and important for us as developers. I hope you have a great day. Take care, and I will see you in the next video.